Good afternoon and welcome back. It seems like just yesterday that we were here. Okay, it was 2 days ago. But the war has spread in ways that I suspect we hadn't projected, and we want to stay on top of things. So we are. So I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC and your host. A quick intro today, and then on to our guest, Dr. David Wurmser of the Center for Security Policy. This is not David's first time with us, and I hope it's not his last time with us. But when he was here in 2025, we spent most of the time talking about Lebanon and talking about his visit to us in 2024, in which we spent most of the time talking about Lebanon. And we are going to talk about Lebanon, among other things, today, because on Monday, Lebanon wasn't a thing, and now it is. So, quick intro, and then David Wurmser. JPC was founded in 1985 to provide perspectives and analysis of foreign and domestic policy by scholars, academics, and commentators. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can sign up for our Insight articles, our In Context blog, and our magazine In Focus Quarterly. The winter issue of In Focus is up now. It is the opening to America's 250th birthday, and spring will be here soon, and we turn to immigration. I'm happy that spring will be here soon. Immigration seemed like the only thing we were concerned about a month ago, but turns out we have more on our plate. So that's jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. You've heard me say that for the last 6 years, and all of those are proving their worth right now. Most important, we support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. And we support the efforts of the government of Israel and the IDF to defend the people in their borders and, when necessary, beyond those borders. Beyond those borders includes Gaza and Lebanon and Iran. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, domestically we advocate for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. And now our guest. David Wurmser is a senior analyst for Middle East affairs at the Center for Security Policy in Washington. He's also a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. We've talked with them before. They're great. And in his spare time, he is the executive and founding member of the Delphi Global Analysis Group. His government service includes having been a senior advisor to the U.S. National Security Advisor, to the Vice President of the United States, and to the Secretary of State. He has military background as well. His military service includes 11 years of intelligence experience in the U.S. Navy Reserves, reaching the rank of lieutenant commander. David holds degrees in political science, international affairs, international economics, and foreign policy from Johns Hopkins University. You can find his work in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Commentary, and other places, and he is on the air in all the places you would think that he should be. So I am really pleased to say right now, David Wurmser, the floor is yours. What do we need to know here?
Well, yeah, if we do start with Lebanon, like you suggest, I would it sort of strategically what's happened here is it seems that Hezbollah has submitted the winning entry for this year's Darwin Awards. And the reason for that is really twofold. One is this is a war all Israelis knew was not finished, and that they have been seeking an opportunity to finish it. Anybody who goes to northern Israel in the last 2 years or year knows that these towns are still largely depopulated and so forth because few residents want to go back, few businesses want to move back in, knowing that Hezbollah is still out there across the border, even if the Israelis have effectively pushed them back enough to avoid an October 7th type attack, they're still too close, and every Israeli knew it. So there was a real feeling in Israel that this was a war that needed to still happen and be finished. It's bringing to closure the October 7th attacks on the northern front. And the Israelis want to bring this October 7th war to closure, and this was a big part. The second thing is Hezbollah is not really its own front. It is really part of a much larger war with Iran. And Israel now is in the what seems to be the final battle with this regime in Iran, and it's both in Iran's interest to throw whatever it has in sort of a Samson option at Israel, and Israel whatever it needs to do in order to shut down that front to A, not divert itself from the task at hand, which is to focus on Iran's regime, but second of all, in order to finally deal with Iran's closest approach and inimical structure to Israel. Essentially, Iran is on Israel's northern border here. So, on both counts, Hezbollah gave Israel the comfort of having drawn first blood by shooting missiles a few days ago onto Israel, and ever since has been escalating. So the Israelis don't want to commit massive amounts of force yet because they prefer to fight and focus on one front at a time, namely Iran. But this is, in my view, the battle has been joined there and it will go all the way.
Okay, the Lebanese government says Hezbollah is now illegal in Lebanon. I'm happy to hear them say that. However, they are not in a position to get rid of it. Are they in a position to facilitate what Israel does? And are they willing to facilitate what Israel does? Because it seems to me we could be looking at, I don't know, the next entry into the Abraham Accords, if they do it right and they get rid of it and they decide they want peaceful relations with Israel.
Yeah, well, what's happening is, it's a little bit the bandwagon effect. They see the winning team. The winning team now is Israel against Iran, and more broadly America and Israel in the region. So clearly they want to make their peace. I mean, make their not formal peace. They
Not yet.
in a not in a literal sense, a figurative sense. They want to make their peace with the Israelis right now. They can maybe contribute margins here and there. Hey, there's a Hezbollah unit here. Maybe they could provide lists of people they know are members of Hezbollah in the cities and towns. Maybe they could work a little bit with tracking down finances once Lebanon is liberated from the grips of Hezbollah. There's a lot of stuff that they can do, but probably further down line. By the way, this thing of tracking down Hezbollah finances and operatives abroad, this is a big one. If they can help with us and the Israelis on that, that's important because these operatives are part of the Iranian structure, which is also part of the CCP structure, etc. So it is very important that we know who these people are and track them down so they don't haunt us for decades on end. Now, that said, about the Abraham Accords, I think they would like to enter it, the government, but the thing is, Lebanon now is entering like Israel. We're focused on Iran, and we should remain focused on Iran. This is a wounded enemy. Never turn your back on a wounded enemy. Uh, but it is an enemy that has to be brought down. But we do see strategic threats emerging on the horizon, and they will affect Lebanon no less than Israel. Specifically, we do see the Sunni question, specifically the Sunni question as it's been reinvigorated around the Muslim Brotherhood and the evocative symbolism of Sunni Islam establishing an Islamic movement as the government of Damascus. It's the first time Arab Islamic forces have controlled Damascus in 1,000 years. And the irony is that Mecca is, of course, Mecca for the Muslims, but politically, Damascus is the heart of what created Sunni Islam, the Umayyad Caliphate, 1,300 years ago. So the image here is that the pure original Islamic formula has been recreated in Damascus. And that's creating a civilizational confidence that the Turks are buying into and that they're feeding off of what they see as an emerging victory in Europe of Islam over Christendom. This that is going to be the strategic problem we have to deal with going forward after Iran. And this is something that all the minorities in the region, whether it's the Kurds, the Druze, the Alawites, the Yazidis, the Maronites, the Greek Orthodox, all are going to deal with, and that will involve Lebanon as well. So beyond Lebanon accords, we're talking about it's sort of on the cusp of either becoming the front part of a collection of minorities that align with the West, or it becomes the battleground of a very dangerous struggle.
So you only mentioned Turkey once in that conversation.
Right.
So mention it again, because it seems to me that what props up the government in Damascus, aside from the fact that the United States seems committed to it, is that Turkey is committed to it. And of the people that you listed, the Kurds and the Druze and other people, um, Turkey doesn't like any of them. So is this an alliance between Turkey and this Damascus government? And how bad is that for us?
It is. It is an alliance. It is bad. By the way, these minorities, you're right, that not only does Turkey not like them, they don't like Turkey. Many of them, until now, have felt that Sunni Islam is something they're worried about, but the real nemesis has been Turkey. For example, the Alawites. They turned to Arab nationalism in such a radical way because not only because they were not Sunni and they were a minority, and like many minorities, you try to find a new ideological framework where you're not the minority anymore. So if you're Arab, you're not the minority, et cetera, and so forth as an Alawite. But in particular, they needed Arab nationalism because they needed to make this an Arab Turkish thing because the Turks for them have been the primary fear and terror for the last hundreds of years. And that's also true for the Druze, uh, the Maronites, etc. This has been their nemesis. So there is a Turkish element. Turkey is currently defined by Erdogan, who is Muslim Brotherhood. And it is really the Muslim Brotherhood is the animating ideology. And of course, through the funding and support of Qatar, which is the other one I didn't mention, but is part of this strategic triad of Turkey, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Neo-Umayyad Damascus. You've got basically the parameters of the strategic bloc that's very, very dangerous. By the way, they're also sympathetic to the Chinese, so there is a hookup to the Belt and Road, and we can talk about that later, provoking war, a lot of conflict with India. We don't even see India as part of this, but they are. So there's a really dangerous strategic game going on. Uh, there are fissures that can be played with. Erdogan wants to be the neo-Ottoman Sultan, whereas the imagery evoked by the Neo-Umayyads is the Neo-Umayyad Caliphate in Arab. Ultimately, there can either be a sultan or a caliph. So you could play that in the long run, but right now, I don't think that's a factor. We're talking with an ideological force that is cooperating with each other, the Muslim Brotherhood, the rise of essentially the Sunni inability, the Sunni ideological inability to deal with modernity and confront it. We're sort of in that showdown against other Sunnis, by the way, who like the UAE, who have a whole different view. So we're really in that, and that is going to be the and Turkey is what is really one of the, if not the main player.
You mentioned then, excuse me, Qatar. So they got attacked by Iran, and their statement wasn't bad, and they seem to be lining up for the moment with the United States and the US attacks on Iran. Is that Qatar saying, hmm, maybe we better forget about this Iran Shia thing and present ourselves as Sunnis and be more overt on that side, on the Sunni revolution side, than being the lapdog for Iran?
Well, like so many of these, we saw the Chinese communists, the Russian communists in the 60s and 70s absolutely hated each other, even went to war with each other.
Right.
They both understood one critical thing, which is neither gets anywhere if they don't overcome the United States. And this is what we had to understand about the Islamic Shiite regime of Iran and the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood and so forth, really embodied in some ways by Hamas, which had two hats. A
Right.
part of it was aligned with Iran, part of it is headquartered in Turkey. They knew they had a common enemy that had to be overcome first. And then they can turn to the question versus each other. Qatar played that game. I think what Qatar's doing is it has begun to realize, remember, Qatar is very small, very weak, a couple 100,000 people. It can't wield power the way the United States does, or even tiny Israel is right now. Their power is through manipulation and money. And they probably feel that they pushed it a bit too far and chose the losing side before this war with Iran began. One has to remember they refused to let us use their airspace. They tried to sabotage the diplomacy of the war. So did Turkey. It was they tried everything to stop this from happening, and this is emerging as a victory for the United States. And rather than stand in its way, they want to now probably claim part of it by saying, no, 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 we were okay with it. No, 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 we're on your side. There's that. The second thing is, ironically, they're helping Iran. The Iranian regime has two Hail Mary passes, probably not a good analogy to use in an Islamic context. But at any rate, one is to say there's going to be a dissolution of Iran and chaos and civil war. So partition and civil war, that's one basket of things. So the Iranian government is actually encouraging these things to provoke these things so they can say, you see, we're here to maintain security and try to frighten the Iranian people back into rallying behind them. The second one is that if they can navigate Iran into being a bleeding fish when there is a Sunni feeding frenzy of its corpse, then they essentially provoke inside Iran existential fears. The Iranians are terrified of a unified Turkish, Pakistani, Sunni Arab attempt to slaughter them. This is not an unreal fear for them, and that is exactly what the Iranian government is trying to do by attack these Sunni countries. It's trying to turn this into an Arab Persian Sunni Shiite conflict to force its people back to help. It probably won't help. It's a desperate act, but that's how we have to understand it. And Qatar is playing into it. But Qatar is playing a very adept game of maintaining itself in the game with the United States. That is why it's drifting towards saying, no, 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 me too, me too.
Okay. So the country we don't hear much about then is Egypt. Now, Egypt hates the Mother Muslim Brotherhood, or at least El-Sisi does. I don't know about the Egyptian people. Nobody ever seems to ask their opinion. Um, where does Egypt fall in this? Is this setting up Turkey on one side and Egypt on the other side as pro and anti?
Well, in fact, that's been what really has been a divide until now. And despite a lot of Israeli concerns about Egypt and agony over various actions by Egypt, including essentially allowing the border to become porous with Gaza and teeing up what was this horrible war on October 7th, the Israelis have played fairly cautious with Egypt, largely because they know that Egypt is navigating a very delicate and dangerous game between these camps to survive, and generally has been on the side of opposing Erdogan. However, in the last year, there have been strong signs that Egypt knows that most of the rank and file of the military, which is the core power structure, of course, in the country,
Right.
that the rank and file of the military really is sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood. And so you've seen in the last months Egypt trying to appease Turkey, even to the point of occasionally joining with Turkey on strategic affairs. It joined on the issue of nearly on the Greta Thunberg flotilla, but that's kind of theatrics. an easy throwaway. But we've seen it in a much more serious way in various ways. Uh, for example, in the Horn of Africa, challenging Israel's what is really emerging as a very important strategic ally of the UAE. The UAE and Israel were navigating a very adept chess game strategically in the straits, entering the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, with Somaliland, southern Yemen, and Socotra Island, and had essentially teed it up to allow the West, via Israel and the UAE, to dominate the entry to the Red Sea from the south, to challenge the Houthis, which are trying to close it and keep it under their control from the north. Unfortunately, via the Sudan issue, via the various issues in the Horn of Africa, Egypt has drifted in that more toward the side of Turkey. Similarly, on some other issues, we've seen the Egyptians try to appease the Turks in North Africa and so forth. So I think Egypt is a nation in a state of flux. The long-term trends are not good. Assisi is trying to navigate his survival and the survival of some of his cadre, but it's coming more and more at the expense of ideological surrender. And there is a certain tipping point where this becomes a strategic problem for the United States and for Israel. I think one thing has helped, though, and that is President Trump.
Okay.
Egypt made peace with Israel not because Israel was strong, not because he was a Zionist. Sadat made peace with Israel because he knew that was the ticket to switching sides from the Soviet Union to the United States. And in one of the great acts of 20th century statesmanship, and there were some great leaders in the 20th century, like Churchill, but certainly Sadat, ranking up there, understood before anybody else did, this is before Saigon fell, that the East Bloc was going to lose to the West, and the Soviets were going to lose to the United States. And as a result, he understood he needed to switch sides. And the ticket to that was Israel. So its relationship with Israel, not unlike the UAE, is anchored not to Israeli realities. It is anchored to its ticket to be part of the American alliance. Under Biden, under Obama, unfortunately, he felt orphaned. He felt alienated. He felt the West had abandoned him and was siding with the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. So the utility of being in the membership of the United States as opposed to China, for example, was going down for al-Sisi. And with it, the commitment to peace was going down. I think President Trump, by reasserting American leadership, inadvertently or maybe intentionally, probably did as much as can be done to shore up the Egyptian-Israeli peace because of that.
Okay, so I'm going to get to China in a minute, but put it over there. We have two other countries in the Middle East that most people are not talking about, but and that's Jordan and Iraq. So this sort of leaves Jordan and its Hashemite king, who is an interloping king. He's not without Egypt. If Egypt is leaning toward the Brotherhood, Jordan's been afraid of the Brotherhood. Jordan is afraid that the Hashemite king will be deposed. And Iraq, which has a plurality of Shiites, not a majority, but a plurality, has been under the control of Iranian-oriented militias. What happens to these two countries? Is it possible to see Iraq getting rid of those Shiite-oriented militias? Is it possible to see the Jordanians making a stronger pitch for security from Israel or from the United States?
Let's start with Jordan. Jordan, it really was under the shadow of Iraq and threats. We saw a lot of destabilization activities in Jordan coming from Iran, using access to Iraq and the natural ties between Iraq and Jordan, which are longstanding. And that threatened to some extent the Jordanian regime. But the Jordanian regime faces a different threat now. The threat it faces is more from Damascus. There are really two parts to Jordan, but there are really three. The two parts are you have the tribal core of Jordan, which is the Hashemites, which is comes from the Hejaz, which is the northern part of Saudi Arabia. They are Bedouin. They have no love for the Palestinians or urban Arabs in the north, and they have been aligned with the Iraqi tribes, which were the core structure that turned against Zarqawi in the end and helped ultimately then defeat ISIS and the Islamic movements in the north. On the other hand, the Iraqi tribes were to some extent, some of them were the core structures of sympathy, especially those Iraqi tribes that have a presence in northern Jordan and western Syria. And the Iraqi tribes do extend all the way to Haifa in Israel. If you go to the Galilee in Israel, there's towns called like Arab al-Ramshe. That is a Bedouin settled tribe that is actually part of the Iraqi tribal structure. Uh, these the Palestinians are one thing. They're sort of urban Arabs, and then you have these Iraqi tribes, which hitherto had been tribally aligned with the tribes coming from Saudi Arabia. But now what we're seeing is the adept use by Julani, the Turks, the ISIS, to use the old remnant structures of Zarqawi to begin to pull the Iraqi tribes on their side, almost leapfrogging the Palestinian presence in northern Jordan. And what you're seeing now is something that threatens the Jordanian regime even more than did the Iranians using the Palestinian issue, which is the tribe. They're dividing the tribal structure that forms the core of the Jordanian regime between the Iraqi tribes, trying to bring them over to the Julani side, the Muslim Brotherhood side, and the classic Hashemite tribes of the Hejaz, which are the Saudis and have traditionally been against the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is now getting into very dangerous territory with Jordan. Iraq, on the other hand, is getting into less dangerous territory. At the end of the day, the core power structure of Iraq rests on two pillars. One are the Kurds and one are the Shiites. Yes, there are these Iraqi tribes, yes, but they're really only Iraqi Sunnis represent a fairly small minority inside Iraq. If Iran goes down, you will see traditional Shiism reemerge under elements in Iraq, which really don't like this political, ideological warfare with the West. You may see a secularization of a lot of the Shiites. That was a trend anyway. And moreover, a lot of the Shiite militias that are oriented toward Iran won't only be orphaned, but probably some of them will be destroyed in the next few weeks. We have seen already some activity by the US and Israel in Iraq against these Iraqi militias. So, in many ways, ironically, I think we have been debating for 20 years the Iraq war, whether it was wise or not. But the truth is, the Iraq war isn't over because the Iraq war eventually didn't become an Iraqi insurgency against America. It became an Iranian-sponsored insurgency against the American presence in Iraq. And that will only end when Iran's regime is brought down. So I think we're at the verge of a final resolution on some level of this Iraqi conundrum as well. And that will go more on a positive side, but not in the Sunni areas.
So I'm glad there's one positive side that you could present to us, because we have, as the American people, been focused obviously on Iran. And I'm going to ask you, excuse me, I'm going to ask you some things about Iran directly. But all of these things are intertwined in ways that I think we haven't paid attention to. And that's why you're here, David, because you pay attention to them. And I don't think anybody has been sitting around thinking, how does this impact the American relationship with Syria or Lebanon or Jordan or Iraq? And we need to do that, because otherwise we're liable to find ourselves very successful over here in Iran with missile launchers and, that sort of thing. But the whole rest of it goes to hell. And we really can't afford that. And Israel can't afford that. So let me ask you an Israel question before we go to the actual subject of Iran and some things that are happening in Iran. What does the Israeli public have to say these days? What's on their, what are they angry about? What are they worried about? What are they happy about? Are they happy that the Israelis and the Americans have finally decided to end the war? I don't want to say they started the war because they didn't start the war. The war started 47 years ago. But it is this administration in the United States, coupled with this Israeli government, that has decided to end that war. How do they feel about it?
Well, I think let me start with the negative. What are they worried about or angry about?
Always start with the negatives.
They're worried about the United States. They're worried about Western civilization. They realize, as Jews do as a whole, not just Israelis, that the cause of freedom is at the foundation of Jewish prosperity. When the world is free, we thrive as a people. Every time we've been in a situation, whether it's Venice or so forth, where a sort of freedom, some elements of freedom emerged, we do better. And it's for that reason that Israel and the Jews as a whole see the wealth and success of the United States as an existential matter for the Jewish people. Because we implicitly understand that the freedom represented by the United States is the best path for Jewish people to survive and thrive. So anything that suggests the United States is off the rails, going the wrong way, or so forth, is of great agony for the Israelis and for Jews more broadly. And there is a concern that Americans are losing their way. They're forgetting who they are. They're forgetting that the foundations of Western civilization that led to American freedom, and that concerns them. More broadly, Europe, they're quite concerned that Europe is reaching the 11th hour, or perhaps the clock struck midnight in some places. They're less concerned about their own survival via Europe, but they understand Europe has a big impact on the United States. So again, that is, I think, one of the greatest concerns Israelis have is in the long term, the success of the United States is an irreducible Israeli interest, and they're worried about that. It's also an interest they have only limited power to affect. So that is an element of concern. On the happy side, one is October 7th opened up uh, a war on seven fronts. This war with Iran is closing several of them. It's bringing that war to its final termination. That for Israelis is a relief. And as you said, it's a 47-year war. It's a relief. A major threat is being removed. They understand there's the threat emerging from Muslim Brotherhood, Sunni Islam in that form that it's taking with the Muslim Brotherhood. They understand that, but that's something they think that they can begin to organize with in an orderly way once you deal with the axis surrounding Iran. So they're happy that this issue is finally being laid to rest, and their assumption is this is going to go all the way. Uh, but the Israelis also have one, so there's a deep optimism in Israel because that sort of is where they're headed. But there is also one other thing that I think is not appreciated even in Israel, but outside of Israel. For those of us who are obsessed with American history, boring as it is for most Europeans, it's fascinating for us Americans. And one of the things that's fascinating about it is what happened in America between 1865 and 1890. The Civil War was over. The agony of reshaping America after the original creation, the 80-year itch, was over. And America turned inward to become a very different country by 1890, the country that we basically live in now. It may not have become a global superpower visibly by 1890, but in fact it was. It already was a great international power, if not the greatest international power, even though it had not been validated as such yet until after World War I. Israel, in my view, is entering the same period now. The 80-year itch is over. The elements of internal agony over creation, there still has to be a lot wrapped up, but I think there's a determination in Israel right now to address some of those internal structural problems that were left over from creation, like the legal reform that ripped Israel apart. But most importantly, the external war, like the Civil War in America, sort of was the gateway to a different period where Israel will likely face considerable immigration growth. Their demographic growth is very strong. And you're going to see Israel building into a very different place in the next 30 years, akin to the way the United States did. And there's a feeling beginning to emerge in Israel of this, not in terms of the historical parallel, but that they're at the cusp of a major uptick in growth and civilizational solidity. And I think that's one of the big stories that will come in the next, and they're entering this conflict with the world of the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood world, entering from a strong on a strong foot rather than sort of in defensiveness like they were in 1979 against the Iranians.
So it's interesting because I have seen among um, Arab commentators that I like and trust, not, people who spew stuff, that the Arabs always believed that they could defeat Israel. They believed it. If we don't do it now, we will do it later. If we don't do it later, we'll get more weapons. We'll do it after that. And their belief was, in many cases, that they could continue these wars for a very long time. Watching Israel now and watching it in coordination with the United States sends a different message. And that is maybe we can't do this. Maybe all those years that we have spent erasing Israel or thinking we could, maybe we can't. And that again, because I want to leave the show on a positive note, but we're not at the end yet, so we have plenty of time for negatives. But it does seem to me that there is an understanding among many people in the Middle East that Israel is not leaving. And now you have to figure out how to live with it.
That's
And
right.
whether they do or they don't, this becomes the operative question.
That's right. And I think
So,
that was, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. You think,
No, I think that was what was at the heart of the Abraham Accords when they were signed 4 or 5 years ago.
yep.
It wasn't a ticket to get in good graces with the Americans like it was with Egypt. It was UAE put its finger in the wind and it determined the force to deal with in the future is Israel. And luckily for it, it wasn't a force that threatened it. So it happily, I think, joined the Abraham Accords. I think India sees the same. Well, that's another thing, which is India and Japan. You have an interesting situation where you have three countries in the world that are very ancient. They're very free and democratic, and they're either mastering or pushing up against mastery of modernity. So they've reconciled ancient tradition with modernity. They've reconciled freedom with modernity and ancient tradition with freedom. And that's Japan, India, and Israel. I would call it the League of Rising Ancients. And strategically, this is important because this is a Southern bloc boxing in the Chinese and the Belt and Road, uh, which extends all the way to Turkey, as we had alluded to before. We don't appreciate how much India and Turkey are at odds with each other. And you saw it manifested last week in the summit between Modi of India and Netanyahu of Israel, that there is a real conscious coming together of those countries, uh, which then links up with the Western-oriented Israeli strategic reality. Israel has become now a real linchpin between Asia and Europe, and it's strategically at sort of the epicenter of these major blocs. This is something new for Israel because it positions it to some extent as a geopolitical player, something it had never imagined it would be. No, it's not a superpower that can put 10 aircraft carriers out there, but it is a power with enough position and power to matter. So I think that's another major strategic shift that you're seeing with Israel. Of course, the big thing is Iran. That's an ancient culture. It's not free. and it's not dealing with modernity, but largely because it's not free and it's run by the Ayatollahs. But one could imagine Iran assuming a place at that table of the League of Rising Ancients over time if things go right. And this is the strategic reality of the Middle East then going forward.
So expand that a little bit. It's not just the Middle East. One of the places that seems to have made a conscious decision on the side of modernity is Central Asia. You have Israel and Azerbaijan with very good relations. Israel and Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has now joined the Abraham Accords. Israel has political and economic relations with every country in Central Asia, which, in my opinion, gives it some stature when you're looking at India and when you're looking at China and when you're looking at, all the different parts. So you talked about Israel down in Africa, but also up in Central Asia.
Correct. Correct. Very correct. Look, Turkey is on the wrong side here, but the Turkic countries are not.
Right.
And that is a major agony for the Chinese and Turkey, because at the end of the day, that is the step. The Central Asian steppe has ever since the Bronze Age, Scythians in the Iron Age, it has been the strategic reality that dominates the entire area of Iran over to Russia. We keep forgetting Russia for 2,000 years, 3,000 years has been touched by the Central Asian steppes, and then the other direction, even China. So the Central Asian steppes we see as sort of a negligible asterisk, maybe a cute historical footnote with the Silk Road, but we don't understand the Silk Road was just a manifestation of something far more profound, which is 4,000 years of the steppe, the steppe area being the strategic balancing factor, if not font of strategic power of that entire Eurasian subcontinent, with then South being dominated by other things, but it is not an insignificant factor.
Okay, I can't believe it. We are at 12:43, and we're going to close the program in a minute. And we haven't talked about Iran at all. I mean, except as a motivator or an impact agent on other people. And I think I'm thrilled. I am thrilled. This has been absolutely fabulous because if you only focus on where the troops are, and you know me, I focus a lot on where the troops are, but if you only focus on where the troops are, you miss the point. And the point is how the region and other regions relate to one another. And Israel is just in that spot where it needs to relate to Africa, and it needs to relate to the Middle East, and it needs to relate to Central Asia. And then it hops over oceans and it relates to the United States. So I think this is great that we have spent 45 minutes talking about the Iran war without talking about the Iran war. So now you get my final question, David Wurmser. Let me thank you first, because brilliant, brilliant. I mean, I couldn't be better. We're going to post this and everybody has to watch this. So I want to go out on a positive note. What's the positive thought to leave the viewers?
Well, first of all, I think Israel is rising. I think the United States has reasserted itself as a power. Of course, internally, the big question in America is internal. Can we get our civilization back on track with self-confidence and knowledge of who we are and continue the Plato to NATO continuum onward? Which I hope happens, but right now things are going in the right direction. I think Iran will resolve itself now, finally. This is a big one. For 47 years, this has been the haunting black cloud over the West, over everybody. It is not an insignificant win for the West. It's almost as big as the Berlin Wall. Not quite as big, but almost. And it is a major blow to China. So I think we are being handed a circumstance of immense positive potential going forward. And luckily, the Israelis, the United States, Israelis more than the United States at this point, are primed to be in the right place for that. And hopefully the United States will come around and also be there.
That's a great positive note to go out on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, check our website because we've got stuff going up all the time. David Wurmser, thank you. I cannot thank you enough for a great program. And
More
everybody else, see you in a week.